2020 has been a rough year for everyone. People have lost loved ones, others have lost their jobs or their business, and the future is uncertain for millions of people out there. As a non-essential business, amusement parks have been hit hard also. Ever since March, the fate of the 2020 coaster season seemed to change on a daily basis as chains, parks, and local leaders had to decide when it was safe to reopen, and what would have to change in order to reopen. Most of the changes have been negative, but there are some that we all hope are here to stay. Now that the shortened 2020 season is coming to an end, we can reflect on the year that was. These are the worst things and the best things that happened to amusement parks in 2020. Let's start off with the bad stuff so we can end on a positive note. I have a list of 10 negatives and 5 positives. The number 10 worst outcome from the 2020 season was the closure of the drinking fountains. Parks are trying to limit their touch points, and one major touch point is drinking fountains. Everyone is touching it with their hands, and hopefully nobody is touching it with their mouths, but you know how it usually goes, especially with kids. Parks were generous with their water cups given out at their restaurants to make up for the lack of drinking fountains. This helped a lot, but I went to a few parks that were extremely crowded, and the food lines were over 20 minutes long. And with the summer heat, waiting 20 minutes for some water could be downright dangerous. It seems like the parks were creating a new health problem while trying to prevent another one. Number 9 on the bad list is the reservation system. Parks were trying to limit the number of people on a daily basis to make sure they didn't exceed a certain percentage of their capacity. I only saw one park actually reject reservations because they hit their new capacity, and that was Frontier City on their opening day. It was always something you had to keep in mind when planning a visit to a park. If you were going on a road trip and needed to buy a park ticket, you needed to buy that ticket early to secure a reservation. I bought tickets to Lagoon, Kennywood, and SeaWorld San Antonio just because of the reservation system, and I had to cancel those trips, so I was stuck with a non-refundable ticket. A lot of parks stopped requiring reservations, like those in the Cedar Fair chain and Silver Dollar City. SeaWorld and Six Flags kept their system in place, but Labor Day weekend at Six Flags Over Texas was about as crowded as I've ever seen that park. So half of their total capacity is still pretty crowded. I was worried about needing reservations for my home park of Magic Mountain because I usually go there without planning to go, but it never opened this summer, so I didn't have to worry about it. Number 8 is the mandatory mask policy at just about every park. If the park wasn't requiring a mask in the early summer, they all seemed to put that policy in place shortly after. I look back at all of the pre-2020 days where I went to a hot, humid park and it was just miserable. I'm talking about specific summer days that I had at Dollywood, Holiday World, and Hershey Park, but I was able to breathe the fresh air. After the summer of 2020, I said I would never complain about the heat at a park again, as long as I didn't have to wear a mask. It's definitely something you get used to. By the time I went to my last park of the summer at Kings Island, I forgot that I had it on most of the time. But I remember my trips to Frontier City, Silver Dollar City, and Cedar Point, as well as the Texas parks, where it was just punishing. And anyone who needs to wear glasses or sunglasses, especially on humid days, you won't be able to see half the time because they get so fogged up with your breath coming out of the top of the mask. I'm not saying that masks are a bad idea or they weren't necessary, but wearing them around the parks did suck. Number 7 is the staffing issues. Parks often bring in international workers to help fill all the positions for the summer. With the delayed opening of most of the parks, as well as the international travel restrictions, these workers were either sent home or they were never able to come. I worked at Magic Mountain for many years, and I can tell you that the park would have a really tough time in the summer months without these international workers. Lack of staffing means less food options throughout the park, and more importantly, closed coasters. Cedar Point is a massive park, and they had to sacrifice some major rides because they just did not have enough people to make it work. I heard that some workers from Kings Dominion came to Cedar Point when it became clear that their park would not open, so that helped, but it was still a different experience. Number 6 is the half capacity on the trains. Social distancing is a major theme of the current pandemic, and parks stress that from the time you step into the park to the time you leave. There are markers on the ground to stand 6 feet apart from others. Tables are blocked off so you can't sit near other people. These didn't really cause problems. You just do it. No problem. The one social distancing practice that sucked came on the rides. Most parks were blocking off every other row so people weren't sitting close to each other. This meant that trains went out only half full, which cut capacity in half. This killed the wait times of just about every ride, but it also caused another problem that checks in at number 5. And that number 5 is assigned seating on every ride. Some rides already had assigned seating to control who's in the station, but with social distancing in mind and ensuring the train is spaced out enough, just about every ride had an op telling people where to go. Most of these ops were taking row requests, and I definitely appreciate that. but it's better when you can just walk up and choose your row without having to ask. I don't like bugging ride ops, and I feel like I am bugging the ride ops, but row is important, and I only get 1 or 2 rides on these coasters that are 2,000 miles from my house, so I want to make the most of it. Honestly, this one should be lower on the list, but I felt it made sense to talk about this after the half capacity entry because they go hand in hand. Number 4 is the limited park hours. Usually you can go to Cedar Point and get early entry with your Platinum Pass or Hotel Breakers voucher and stay until 10 or midnight. Cedar Point cut out the early entry this year and closed shop around 8 p.m. Limited park hours was a theme across the country. This made sense considering the staffing issues that we talked about earlier, and with the reduced capacity, it cost the park less money to be open for fewer hours. This also meant no night rides on coasters that are the best in the dark. If you were visiting a major park for the first time in 2020, you also had less time to experience the park in full and had to cut things out of your agenda, in addition to the ride closures due to staffing issues. Number 3 is the postponement of the 2020 coasters. Only the parks who got a big head start on their 2020 editions wound up opening them. Texas Stingray actually opened a couple weeks before the park shut down in mid-March. Orion was ready to go for Kings Island's opening day in April, but that got pushed off a couple months, but Kings Island still went ahead and opened it with the park. The same applies for Candemonium at Hershey Park. Six Flags never gets the ball rolling on their projects until the year they open, sometimes well into the year they open. So Aquaman and Jersey Devil Coaster were officially postponed until 2021. SeaWorld poured serious cash into their 2020 investments, with all of their parks getting a major coaster, hoping for a big return on their investment. This became impossible with the park closures and the limited capacity. Manufacturers went after SeaWorld for not paying them for a few of these new additions, and this was really disconcerting and made us wonder about SeaWorld's financial health. Other than Texas Stingray, which was already open, all of their other 4 additions were pushed to 2021. There was a lot of speculation that 2020 was going to be the best year for coasters, but the events of this year suddenly made 2021 a lot stronger. The second worst thing to come out of 2020 for the amusement park world was the closure of a bunch of parks. Everyone was shut down at the end of March into April and even for most of May, but parks started reopening at the end of May. Silverwood, Lagoon, Fun Spot, Mount Olympus, and other parks followed in June. Holiday World, Indiana Beach, and then by July most parks had opened. These parks lost a good amount of time in the late spring and early summer, including Memorial Day weekend, but were able to salvage most of the summer, and despite all the restrictions, people who wanted to go to their home park were able to. But so many other parks were not as lucky. Six Flags New England, Kings Dominion, Six Flags Great America, Carowinds, Valley Fair, Michigan's Adventure, Canada's Wonderland, and just about every park on the West Coast, just to name a few, have been closed for 6 months running. And those parks that are not open year-round have already said that their goal is spring 2021. These parks lost an entire year. Some may argue that with all the restrictions, parks may have been better off keeping their doors shut. But for anyone on the West Coast, North Midwest, or in parts of the Mid-Atlantic or Northeast, you may have had to forfeit an entire year at your home park, which is unprecedented and leads right into my number 1 entry on this list. And that number 1 is the long-term financial effects for every park and everyone associated with these parks. Being closed for a good chunk of the summer and reopening with an attendance cap, or not even opening at all, was a major blow to everyone in the industry. Cedar Fair and Six Flags are extending their 2020 season passes into 2021, and this was done to avoid issues with pass holders who didn't get to use their passes this year. But that means a massive loss of income for the 2021 season. Think of how many people buy their season passes every fall for the next year. They may get new pass holders, but they'll get nothing from every single existing one who would have probably renewed their pass. Six Flags is offering a lot of extra perks for their members also, who have been paying monthly throughout this whole mess. This includes free upgrades, extra skip the line passes, more membership points, and other stuff that doesn't cost the chain much to offer. This lack of income means that you can say goodbye to any large capital investment in the future. They'll be resting on their existing attractions until they can bring their profits back up. And who knows how long that'll really take, given how much of a hole 2020 put them into. This is a hole that some smaller parks may never be able to recover from. We'll have to wait and see which ones are closed forever. This also affects the health of the manufacturers, who won't get that phone call that they could normally expect from these parks and chains in the next few years. We'll have to see how they hold up, and if we lose any of them in the years to come. Regardless of what happens from this point on, the damage has been done. It could get worse, don't get me wrong, and the longer it takes to get back to normal, the worse it'll get. But the effects from what has already happened over the last 6 months will have a ripple effect for the long term. Well, that was a downer. Let's talk about the positives. The number 5 best thing that came out of 2020 from a park guest standpoint was fewer crowds. Between capacity limits and people afraid to visit parks during a pandemic, attendance was way down at a lot of parks. This was bad for the park's bottom line. but not a terrible thing for the guest experience. Though this was kind of offset by the half-capacity trains. This was especially apparent on my first trip to Silver Dollar City this year. Even though it was a Sunday, it was much less crowded than my first trip there 2 years ago on a Thursday. Number 4 on the good list is the virtual queue. I love this idea. I said it was going to be a game changer with every park, and it should be number 1 on this list. But as far as I know, only Holiday World is using it. Six Flags mentioned a virtual queue when they released their measures to reopen back in the spring, but I never saw it in place anywhere I went. The idea of waiting in a virtual line while you can go off and get food or get photos or video, that sounds amazing. And it seems like it would be beneficial to the parks to have people going out and buying stuff instead of being stuck in a queue line. I hope this makes it into the mainstream eventually, and 2020 nudged the parks toward this idea. Number 3 is the new security technology. In the old world, everyone with a bag would need to have their stuff opened up and inspected by the guards. In 2020, most parks had a new kind of screening system. They could tell what was in your bag without opening it up. This made the security line go so much faster, and it was the pandemic that forced these chains' hand to invest in this technology. Number 2 is mobile food ordering. This is something that Six Flags had kicked around in the past. There had been signs that they were going to do it in certain places, but it never happened. In 2020, they made a point to do it, and I love it. The app design is just awesome. You can see all of the options, you can filter the Dining Pass options out, you can apply your discounts in Dining Pass easily, and then they give you updates when it's done. I first used this at Frontier City, and it was amazing. And then I used it at Six Flags Fiesta Texas and Over Texas, and it was a nightmare. But that's because the staff was not trained on how to deal with it. Once they tightened that up, this is the wave of the future when getting food at a park. No more 45-minute lines to stand in. Just order food on your phone and be done with it. And the number 1 best thing that has come to amusement parks out of 2020 is the sanitizer stations. I guess this is kind of a boring number 1, but even before the pandemic, I didn't really like getting food at a park after riding coasters all day and not having anything there to wipe the germs off my hands unless I found a bathroom nearby. Just for everyday life and all the germs that exist in the world, sanitizer stations next to ride exits and by restaurants should be here to stay. Parks may get lazy in refilling these, but I'd still like to see the effort from now on. That's my assessment of all the bad stuff and some of the good stuff to come out of 2020 pertaining to the amusement park world. Let me know what you think of this list, and if there's anything else, good or bad, that you can think of that should be on here. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. That's the best way to show your support for the channel. And don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this. And I'll see you guys all next time.